I greet you all, dear students, and I welcome you to our first pre-recorded lecture. And I greet you, dear students, and I welcome you to this class looking at research questions and specifically qualitative research questions. Subsequently, we shall also look at hypothesis, which looks at the quantitative side of research. So we have seen more or less what a research problem is. So that research problem begs a question, more or less. So if that question, if that research problem begs a question, how then do we formulate that research question? Here we want to give a guidance on how you can formulate a qualitative research question. So let us first of all understand what a qualitative research question is not. Yeah, a qualitative research question does not assume anything. Does not assume anything. When you look at hypothesis, we'll see there's an assumption made. There's an assumption about something. But in a qualitative research question, there is a predefined, or rather, there is an understanding that the researcher, together with a certain research community, have little or no understanding about a certain phenomena. So there is no assumption about it. Key point is that there must be a central question. There must be a central question or a main question, broad question that is seeking to explore that phenomena that we've talked about. So the researcher must think, what is the broadest question I can ask in this research, specifically about your research problem? So in all, as we are speaking this, we start with the research problem. Have we clearly defined what our research problem is? As we all know, the previous lecture looked at research problems and how we can formulate a research problem. We went ahead and did some examples in class. So let us start from that background, coming to this one. In regard to the research problem that we have discussed before, what is the broadest question I can ask in regard to that research problem? Usually, qualitative research problems begin with specific words. We all know whatever we speak out has meaning. Somebody already understands what is happening by a question. When someone starts with who, you're asking about, you're trying to discover about a particular person who has blah 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 blah, who looks like this. If I say what is a boy, it means I don't know who a boy is. I don't know who a boy is or what a boy is, if you can think of that. I don't know what a boy is, in what way I can describe a boy. Who is a student? Who is a science student? Who is an ICT or IS student? That implies when I ask such a question, it means I want to discover, or how do MSc ICT students experience the e-learning teaching process? It means I don't know what the experience is as ICT students, but I would like to find out what the experience is. I don't know what it is. So you see that lack of assumption. I don't know what it is, so I would like to find out. So one of the key things to avoid is avoid questions that imply a cause and an effect. Those questions that have a cause and effect, because already that implies an assumption. Does lack of funds cause failure for a student to attend class? I'm already assuming that there is a cause to something. I'm assuming variable A has a cause on this, on variable B. That already implies, so that automatically disqualifies it from being a qualitative question. In all of this, identify a central phenomena that you need to explore. A central phenomena from which your research question arises. This goes back to our research problem, that what I discussed at the beginning, that everything stems from first understanding your research problem. From this, your research question evolves. Again, avoid use of quantitative words like what is the effect, influence, cause, and so on and so forth. Those are quantitative words. What is the effect of cancer on a patient? That means a person starts wringing them out. Loss of weight, um, extreme points of pain, excruciating treatments. And I'm giving quantitative effects. So we avoid questions that will give us such answers or with such quantitative words. Again, we are trying to differentiate between qualitative research question and a quantitative research question. So here are just some examples of qualitative research questions we can consider in our different areas of research. But I think in our forum discussions, we shall go even into detail, and our class discussion. I really wouldn't want to speak more or less to myself without a responsive audience here. So how do we formulate them? We first start with a central question, and then we follow this up with sub-questions. Now, the sub-questions help answer the overall research questions. The sub-questions help answer the overall research questions. Now, most of you at this point may be thinking, but I'm used to research objectives. Are we now getting rid of research objectives? No, definitely no. A research question can be turned into a research objective. So the central research question can be turned into a central research objectives. The subsequent sub-research questions can also be turned into specific objectives. That's why you will later on find out that once you formulate a overall research objective, the specific objectives that follow must all lead to answering or achieving the overall research objective. By achieving the specific objectives, they all lead to achieving the overall research objective. Or if we flip it around, we say the overall research question. Now I'm going to give a sample research question, which I floated around in the previous lecture, where we looked at an example given by Ruth, in which she talked about designing an e-learning application for rural learners. And here, in your research, and you notice that I've started it as a research objective, because this is what we normally do. And we're not changing. We're not saying we should see research questions. No, your research question can be a research objective. It's not I'm not saying that we're getting rid of research objectives. So let me start with what we know. Designing an e-learning application for rural learners. Now, here the researcher can even decide to be very specific and say rural learners in institutions of higher learning. Another person can say rural learners in secondary schools, or someone rural learners in primary schools, depending on which demographic group you wish to focus on. So you want to design an application for rural learners based on a methodological framework that proposes accessibility for all users. This is kind of a rough objective, very rough objective. So how would we flip this into a research question? Yeah, how would we flip this into a research question? Someone can ask, how can a methodological framework design an accessible e-learning platform for rural learners in a developing country? How can? So it's an exploratory. We don't know if it can. Is it possible that it can? So we don't know. This is clearly expressing an exploratory nature. Yeah, now as I read this, I'm thinking some of you may be thinking, okay, this is purely qualitative. What if I wanted to do something similar to this but in a mixed method, considering the discussions we had earlier on time constraints? Even this can be done using a mixed method approach, especially for ICT. It's possible for one to use a mixed method approach, but leaning probably towards a qualitative approach, but introduces the mixed method approach as well to allow for time considerations. So these are questions. This is an overall research question. Now, what would the sub questions be, or what would be the specific objectives? This one, I would not like us to discuss it here. I'd like to throw the ball back to you. I'm going to open up a discussion forum on Moodle, and we propose that overall research question or research objective. What would be the specific research objectives you would put, and then we shall have a discussion in class. Bear in mind, once you have an overall arcing research objective, the specific objectives that you develop under must all answer the overall research objective. Let us say I found out, let me use a human problem, a very, very human problem. I am sick. My objective is to get better. That's my objective. My overall objective is to get better. What are the specific objectives? What are the things that I need to do in order to get better? First thing is find out what is causing me, what is causing my illness. Yeah, what is causing my illness? And here I can state how I can even decide to describe further what my first specific objective is of finding out what is causing my illness. It involves me looking for somebody in the healthcare or medical or any kind of treatment sector, a professional, in other words, to treat me. Someone may say me, I'll go, someone may, I want to be very as generic as possible. Someone will say me, I may prefer to go to a witch doctor. Another person will say for me, I prefer to go to maybe natural healers. Another person will say me, I want to go to what we generally know as our healthcare providers, the different hospitals and so on and so forth. But that would be my first specific objective, is to find out what is wrong with me by seeking trained medical professionals. Then what would be my second specific objective? That the second would be adhere to the prescribed treatments by the healthcare providers. And then 3 is to review my status, my health status. So some people, after going through treatment, they go back to hospital and check if they had the ailment that previously caused it. So those 3 specific objectives, if you look at each one of them, they all lead to answering my first specific objective of my research problem is that I'm sick. My research objective is to get better. I would like to get better. So those 3 specific objectives I have all answer the overall arcing general objective. So the same thing goes for the research questions. So if we had that research question that we had in the previous slide, yeah, which is how can this framework design, So what would be the research questions underneath that? I want us to put our thinking hats on and go to the Moodle discussion forum and begin thinking about that example. Now, and one of the things that is interesting that research questions can help us do is to guide our data collection tools, guide our data collection tools on what it is we are looking for. Okay, not just interviews, not just interviews per se, but all our data collection tools. If I'm looking for literature, if I'm doing a literature review, the research questions should be able to guide me on what it is I am seeking to know or to understand. So again, the specific research questions or sub questions or uh, research objectives guide us on what data to look for and what questions, what areas should we be focused on. So even the exploratory words you use in the sub questions, using things like to discover, to seek to understand, to explore a process, describe experiences, report stories, and all of these actually even point to the method you wish to use. If you're going to explore a process or a phenomena, normally this has to be done within a case study. Yeah, if you're going to explore a certain process. Now, for example, the research question we had is how can a methodological framework design an accessible, how it's basically this process that has been proposed. The framework is a process, it's an artifact. How can it, that demands that we study it in a case study. You cannot say I'm going to use a questionnaire and study a whole section of the population. No, this one demands that we not, sorry, I don't mean questionnaire, but a survey. Survey is a research method, but it demands we use a case study. Means we need to put it in a specific context, a specific area, and then we study if this method can actually develop this application, maybe for a certain group of people, maybe in Kozi, maybe in rural Kabarole or Kienjojo, wherever you may choose to do your study. So that demands a case study. If you seek to understand, that is ethnography. You're looking at the meaning of things in the perspective of inhabitants of a particular social setting. Yeah. If you're describing experiences, that's a phenomenon. Okay, maybe the experience of adoption of open source applications in teaching and learning. What is our experience? Reported stories, that's a narrative. That's something rare you can rarely find in the ICT world. Very rarely find. Some common problems when it comes to our research area and of course research questions. Deciding which area to look at from a range of things that are of interest to you. So like we discussed last week, one of the important things you must remember is that you cannot solve everything. So narrowing down your research problem is key. Then not having sufficient interest in a particular area. And this is especially if you try to follow your supervisor. Do not try to follow your supervisor or the trend that is currently going. Uh, you'll simply do something for the sake of copy and paste, but it will not be something to say that I'm proud that I produced this work. Not focusing on a specific area. Again, this falls back to if you're looking at several issues. If you find you cannot articulate a research problem, that means you have not clearly defined your research problem. If you can't articulate the research question or research objective, then that means your research problem is problematic. So these are just some areas to think about. Now, it's very rare for somebody to simply click a finger and they have a research problem and a research question and all rather objective. That is not the case. Research is it's it's time consuming work. It's work that takes time for you need to think. In other words, one needs to think, spend a good amount of time thinking. Today you may not come up with anything, tomorrow the same thing, the next day, things like that. But the more time you spend with it, the more time you may decide, oh, maybe this area I need to expand, or I need to come a bit further down. Whatever the case, you will learn something new. And especially if you talk about it, especially to experts in that area, that will be very, very helpful. Again, these are just some things for you to weigh as you're developing your research questions. Exploring effects, that is okay. For you to try and explore effects of something, that is okay. To understand issues, gathering participants' perception, being open and flexible. If you're trying to prove anything or to measure, or when you find yourself with a hypothesis, then you know there you're going a little bit, you're no, not going a little bit, you're going completely off the mark. Start with where your research problem, how much is known about it. If there's little known about it, then try to lean more towards the qualitative side. If there is a lot where somebody can make an assumption about a cause and an effect, then that is leaning towards the quantitative side. What do we ask for? What are the right questions to ask for? How are things being done? Yeah. How do people perceive things are being done? What may contribute to an outcome? What are the things that may contribute to a certain outcome? Think think again towards the question, the sample research question I gave you earlier. In what ways do people view a certain problem? And so on and so forth. You can go through this list either in groups or as individuals. Think about them as we explore this thing of creating sub-research questions. Now, in qualitative research, you have descriptive research questions. These ones ask about what actually happened or what is happening. Those are descriptive. Then you have interpretive, which is looking at the meaning of what has happened. What is the meaning? Why do people do this? Why is it that they do not adopt this, and so on and so forth? Then there's that which is theoretical. They ask about why those things happened. Why did those things happen? So this one is looking for the meaning. This is one is looking for why. So the why, this is when someone is actually finding out that, oh, this caused this. And that's the beginning of developing a theoretical framework or a theory or model, whatever you may wish to call it. We have what we call good and bad research questions. So a good research question one is specific, very, very specific. Look at the research question we had earlier. How can this methodology, how can it? So we want to see what it proposes and if this can actually help a rural, develop and design an application for a rural learner. It proposes this. You go ahead and do it. And then you find out if there is that actual effect of accessibility. So being very specific, focus your research, going back to being specific. You should be answering a question. You must be answering something. And it should be answered only and only through research. We shouldn't have a question that can be Googled. If the question can be Googled and we get the answer, that's not research. Then it must be important to a field, a certain specific field. So, in other words, it should not be something that is seeking to support your personal opinion. We don't want that. We don't want something that is seeking your personal opinion. It shouldn't be, it should be manageable. That means it should not be too broad or too narrow. Too broad means you cannot answer it. Too narrow, it means the answers can either be Googled or it can even be assumed. So these are just some guidelines that that guide us on what our research questions should be. Here are just some tips which you can use. Just ask for a few general questions, to ask people to either yes or no. Just some general questions about something, about a certain phenomena. People you ask people to share information with you about an area of your interest. Ask questions that are neutral, that allow us to explore. Maybe I could ask, if I asked, for example, right now, oh, by the way, what did you think about the, the competition between Shiba and Cindy? What do you think about it? That question is is more exploratory than somebody's. I'm truly seeking your opinion in that case. But if I start the question with, don't you think Cindy is a bad dancer? Don't you think she's a bad dancer? That question, I'm already assuming a certain answer, a certain response. I'm already making an assumption about your response. So it should be an exploratory. You should be using exploratory language, which is neutral. Neutral meaning I am expecting a flexible answer, an answer which may be neither nor, it may be or neither, or it could be something else which I never thought of at all, the response. Design and write two question types, the central question and the sub-questions. Don't worry too much about the beginning. These questions change over time. At first, we want something perfect. I've really failed to formulate my research question and so on and so forth. But don't worry so much about that. You perfect it over time with your supervisor. So I thank you for listening to this video, and let me post a discussion forum on this for us to have more discussion, especially about the sample research question and objective that I gave you. Thank you so much.